Hello.
So you didn't listen in class, and now exams are coming up, and you don't know what the Porter's 5 forces are. Well, I'm here to help you. Strap back for an easy explanation of Porter's 5 forces. Firstly, we'll go into an overview.
Secondly, we will go into each of the points of Porter's 5 forces and explain what they are and how they connect. Lastly, we will use a real-life example.
What are Porter's 5 forces framework? Porter's 5 forces are a framework created by Michael E. Porter and is a tool that companies can use to determine how attractive an industry is and help to determine where companies should place themselves in an industry. What do I mean when I say place themselves in an industry and attractiveness of an industry? Porter created something called Porter's generic strategies, which say that either a company should try to be the cost leader or try to be a differentiator.
If you want to hear more about Porter's generic strategies, I have another video explaining it, and it's linked in the description. When I say attractiveness of an industry, I basically mean how profitable companies within the industry are. So if your company could be in any industry, you would want the competition within the industry to be as low as possible, and at the same time, you want it to be hard for other companies to enter or create a substitute.
What most people gets wrong when using Porter's 5 forces framework is that it is not a tool for analyzing individual companies, but a tool to analyze the attractiveness of an industry.
Example. When looking at this model, you see all these arrows pointing in towards the middle.
These 4 factors are external factors influencing the attractiveness of an industry.
And in the middle, you have competitive rivalry, which is how much competition there is between companies within an industry.
What are Porter's 5 forces framework?
Now we'll look at the external factors, and we'll start with threat of new entry. This is how easy or hard this for other companies to establish themselves within the industry in question. So for example, if we look at the car industry again and try to determine the threat of new entry, you would say for a new company to establish themselves in the car industry, it first of all requires a lot of experience, industry know-how, and most importantly a lot of capital to gain the economics of scale technology and the supplier distribution networks required to make a car that can compete on price and quality with the other cars.
The next one we'll look at is the threat of substitution. This explains how likely the product the industry is producing is at risk of getting substituted.
Now, if we look at the car industry again, you could say there's a low threat of substitution, but it depends on how you define the car industry and where.
So in the US, cars are very entrenched, and there's a low threat of substitution from things like public transport, bicycles, and so on.
But if you only define the car industry as traditional combustion engine cars, you could say there is a high threat of substitution from electric cars. I hope that's clear.
The next external factor is supplier power. This factor explains how much negotiating power suppliers of an industry has over their companies in an industry.
So, if the industry you're looking at have very few suppliers, and the product or service the suppliers sell is hard to get, the negotiating power of suppliers will then be high, and that's bad for the profitability of an industry, because the suppliers can charge a higher price for their products, and that reduces the profitability in an industry. Now if we look at the car industry again, you could on the one hand say that materials like lithium for electric cars are hard to get in the demanded quantities, so therefore lithium suppliers have a high negotiating power over the electric car manufacturers.
But on the other hand, if you look at materials which are easy to get like plastics, which have a lot of suppliers,
therefore you must get a balanced picture of the supplier power, and with your own analysis determine if the overall supply power is high or low or in the middle. The last actual factor is buyer power, and this is a lot like supplier power, but just from the buyer's perspective.
Here you have to look at things like how sensitive buyers are to price changes, and is there a lot of buyers? Also things like substitute products. All these things determine the buyer power.
If we take a look at the car industry again, you would say for the majority of customers, buying a car is a big purchase, and therefore very sensitive price changes, and depending on what market you look at, the ability to substitute differs. But at the same time, you have a very high number of customers. But all in all,
some of you might say that this is very imprecise, but there's a lot of things you have to take into account, and as long as you can argue with valid arguments for your position, you will most of the time be right.
So now, how can we use this knowledge for something useful? Well, that again depends on what assignment you have and what you are planning to use it for.
Let's say you have been tasked with evaluating a company and coming up with some things they can do to increase the profitability of the company.
Now let's say we are looking at a company like Tesla, and from the Porter's 5 forces analysis, we find out that lithium availability and cost will negatively affect the company in the future. You might conclude that Tesla should vertically integrate the production and extraction of lithium.
That's just an example, and maybe that's true. Maybe it's not, but I hope you get the point. If you want to learn some more, go to my channel and subscribe.